As a Unitarian Universalist minister, I like to foster pluralism in religion. Pluralism goes beyond simply affirming that different religions are worthy of respect. It goes beyond platitudes that we're all the same or that all our religions lead to the same truth. In actuality, the world's religions are rooted in very different cultures, start from very different assumptions, ask different questions, and they can take us to very different places. We can't put these distinct traditions into a blender and expect to create a smoothie that's worth eating. What we can do is create a deeper understanding between them, and in the process learn more about our own faith and about ourselves. I'm especially interested in Buddhism because it treats life as a process of becoming. And this is a perspective that's congenial to science, congenial to progressive religion, and congenial to coping with a changing world. Today, in this spirit of becoming, I'd like to explore with you a Buddhist theme, the idea of Anatta, or no self. It may seem obscure or even self-contradictory to say that the self does not exist. With tongue planted firmly in cheek, I can imagine a spiritual seeker such as Garrison Keillor or maybe Woody Allen saying, "Oh, teacher, if there is no self, whose arthritis is this?" I'll try to answer this question or something like it before we're done today. First, I need to make a disclaimer. I'm not the most qualified person to speak about this. Although I've had some study and gotten some training, my meditation cushion has gone empty sometimes for long periods of time. Actually, I misplaced that cushion once for a whole year. But a little practice is better than no practice. And good ideas have a way of transforming experience, the way yeast transforms bread. So let's start with the basics. For the Buddhist, a fundamental teaching is that all is suffering. This doesn't mean that everybody experiences suffering all the time, or that suffering is the point of existence, but suffering is inherent in the human condition. As the poet William Blake once wrote, "Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go." The Buddhist seeks to liberate people from suffering, not by denying the suffering or justifying the suffering or anesthetizing it or glorifying it, but by coming to terms with it, cutting through the mental and emotional knots that bind us to our suffering. As human creatures, we're subject to physical pain. In this, we're just like any animal. But unlike these other animals, not only do we feel pain, we know that we're feeling the pain. We rage at the injustice of it. We may even interpret it as a punishment from God. In this way, the emotional and the cognitive aspects of pain can be even more devastating than the physical sensation itself. Much of our suffering is not so much physical as it is existential. Henry David Thoreau put his finger on it when he wrote, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation." The Buddha teaches that we can recognize the root causes of this desperation and move beyond it. Much of this quiet desperation is a response to change, As long as we live, change is going to come. But when change comes, it often brings disorientation and a sense of loss. We all love our families and our friends, take comfort in our homes and our routines. I'm attached to my Mini Cooper outside there on the road, a sporty little car with a license plate that says roomy. But as the years go by, the repairs will start to get frequent, more expensive. The body will probably be dented and scratched, and eventually it'll rust. I know that one day I'll have to give it up, and the same is true of my body. It's a mark of maturity to accept the reality of change, even embrace it, and not to live in fear of it. But the quiet desperation goes even deeper than resistance to change. It goes right to our sense of self. We tend to invest in fixed images or ideas about ourselves to identify with them. Sometimes our lives conform with this, and sometimes doesn't. Any satisfaction is impermanent because life can throw us a curveball at any time. One time, working as a student chaplain, I met a woman who was about to receive a hip operation. She was smiling, she was talkative, she talked about everything except her broken hip. I could see that she was in real distress, and it was not just about her impending surgery. Up until then, the woman had been in control of her life. Everything was as it was supposed to be. Every summer, she played tennis with her friends, but this summer, she'd broken her hip. This incident was probably the first signal to penetrate her consciousness, the reminder that she would not always be the woman who plays tennis. Her identity was threatened, and so she filled the silence with talking about everything under the sun. This brings us finally to the teaching of Anatta, or no self. The Buddha taught us that the self as a solid, permanent thing, as something that exists distinct from the rest of the world, is actually a fiction. In trying to maintain and protect this fiction, we set up ourselves for suffering. In order to feel more solid and real, we distance ourselves from the raw experiences of life and death. We build up walls to keep out what we fear and to hold on to what we have. We live in the past, we live in the future, any place but right now. Judith Leaf is a Buddhist teacher who works with people facing their death. She describes the struggle in this way. We try to force our life into one airtight package. Although it's a struggle to maintain, for the most part it hangs together pretty well. But in fact, our life is not one solid thing from beginning to end. We live in that undefined territory where past and future meet, on the boundary of what is gone and what is to come. That boundary is vivid, but not all that substantial. It's as if we were riding the crest of a wave in the middle of a vast ocean. This may sound like a hard teaching, but it's really quite gentle. You are you, but you are not fixed. You are not separate. You're like the flame of a candle that burns from one moment to the next. To speak of that flame as a thing is only a convenient figure of speech, because from moment to moment, different atoms take part in the combustion. New fuel is consumed. New light is given out. You are not one thing, but a complex sequence of events unfolding in time. The process does not begin with you, and it does not end with you. I recall one night at Kukla's, a restaurant in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, long since closed. My wife of blessed memory gave me a bite of grilled trout, infused with the flavors of smoke and lime and fragrant spices. I took only a little piece into my mouth. I closed my eyes, and the experience unfolded on my tongue and my palate, a constellation of flavors that opened up, blossomed, and fell away. I don't know how long this experience lasted, or when it ended, or if it ended. It doesn't matter. It's no less real. A human life is composed of these ephemeral experiences, transitions large and small, little births and deaths, the gaps between filled with wonder and uncertainty. It's in these moments that we taste beauty and joy and the quality of the eternal. Their significance extends far beyond the individual self. Consider these words from Thich Nhat Hanh. When we look into the heart of a flower, we see clouds, sunshine, minerals, time, the earth, and everything else in the cosmos in it. In fact, the flower is made entirely of non-flower elements. It has no independent individual existence. It inter-is with everything else. That may seem to be an unfamiliar word. Inter-is, interbeing. Another way to describe no self. As Unitarian Universalist, interbeing can be important for us. Goes right to the heart of our seventh principle, the interconnected web of all existence. When I took a bite of that fish in Kukla's restaurant, I consumed another life, a small creature that had once swam and spawned in a sunlit river. The flesh of this fish was transformed into art through the skill of a chef, aided by fire and the smoke of fragrant wood. I shared the experience with my wife at one unique moment in our lives together. In my memory, I touch this moment again, and again I touch my loss and her loss and the joy that outweighs the sadness. I exist because we exist. My well-being cannot be separated from our well-being. Consider our meditation words today. We are like waves in a great ocean. In one sense, each one of us is an individual wave. But at the same time, we are all water, and each one of us depends for our existence on the presence of the other waves. We've come a long way from that puzzling statement that there is no self. To take this teaching to heart is more than just to reject an illusion. It's to embrace the inherent goodness in ourselves and others. It resonates with UU values of dignity, freedom, and interdependence. It's also not far from our Christian roots. We can see it in the open-handed way that Jesus lived and taught, as when he said, "Consider the lilies of the field. how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. This is more than an attitude of passive acceptance. No self translates in action into selflessness. Not just the serenity to accept what we can't change, but the courage to change what we can. When you have faced your suffering and gotten past the illusions that bind you to it, your actions will no longer be dictated by fear. You'll respond to the suffering in others and do what you can to set them free. Maybe now we're in a position to answer the question I raised at the beginning of this sermon, or something like it. If there is no self, whose arthritis is this? One time the Dalai Lama came to speak at Harvard University. After a thoughtful lecture in which he presented several arguments about why the self doesn't exist, the Dalai Lama asked his audience, if there is no self, who is it that told you all this? Who delivered this lecture to you? After a brief silence, the Dalai Lama smiled and answered his own question, saying, just me. May we take these teachings to heart. May we let go the illusions that alienate us from ourselves and each other. May we learn to live in a state of gratitude, motivated by our compassion rather than our fears. So may it be. At this time in our sermon, in our service, I should say, we engage in a spiritual practice which is more than simply to sustain this church and its ministries, but to engage in an act of sharing, which is really about who we are. Will the ushers please come forward?